All right, so ever wondered how those crazy cheap flights just kind of pop up? Like how do airlines like Ryanair and easyJet seem to know exactly where people want to fly?
Yeah.
Sometimes before we even know it ourselves.
Right.
Well, that's what we're diving into today.
Cool.
You shared some really interesting research with me called Optimizing Routes and Network Expansion, Ryanair and easyJet Airlines Market Research.
Okay.
It's from Cognitive Market Research, and the latest update was actually just this past February.
Wow.
So it's pretty up to date.
Yeah.
So our mission today,
Okay.
to figure out the core strategies, the technologies that these big airlines are using to figure out where they're going to fly, and most importantly, the why behind those decisions.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like we're getting a sneak peek at the data behind how the airline industry works.
Absolutely. And I think what's so fascinating about this research is that it really reveals how much sophisticated analysis goes on behind the scenes.
Right.
When we just see a new flight pop up on a booking site,
Wow.
it seems so simple.
Totally.
But this report really shows how much Ryanair and easyJet depend on this detailed data analysis and market research.
Okay, so data analysis, market research. Yeah.
Right.
Those sound like important things.
That's crucial.
But what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
Practically, what are these airlines doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so the report highlights how Ryanair has this really extensive approach.
Okay.
So, for instance, they analyze booking data down to the level of individual postal codes
Wow.
to identify these little micro markets where there's demand for travel that isn't being met. So they're not just looking at the big picture, they're really drilling down into the details.
Interesting.
And then because their model is so focused on keeping costs low, they also look very carefully at airport costs.
Makes sense.
And, of course, they're always keeping an eye on what their competitors are doing
Right.
to try to find those underserved areas.
So analyzing down to postal codes, that's crazy specific.
It is.
I mean, they're really trying to pinpoint exactly where their potential passengers are.
Mm-hmm.
What about easyJet? Do they do something similar?
Yeah, so they also rely heavily on data, but the report suggests that they put a bit more emphasis on direct customer feedback.
Okay.
So they use customer surveys, demographic studies to understand their passengers, and importantly, real-time booking data. So this helps them constantly assess how profitable their routes are and adjust their network based on what's happening right now.
So it's not just about past performance. It's about being really responsive to changes in the market,
Exactly.
as they're happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of this data essentially lets them make informed choices about where to send their planes,
Right.
which of course is key for keeping those passenger loads high and making sure everything runs efficiently, which I imagine is super important for the low-cost model.
Absolute crucial.
Okay, so we've talked about the data they collect, but the report also mentions the crucial role of technology.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of tech are we talking about here?
So this is where it gets really interesting. We're talking big data analytics, AI, and predictive modeling.
Oh, wow.
And these aren't just buzzwords. They're really at the heart of how these airlines make their decisions.
So let's break that down a bit. How does Ryanair, for example, actually use AI in its route planning?
Well, the research shows that Ryanair uses AI-driven tools to create very accurate forecasts of passenger demand.
Okay.
So they're basically trying to anticipate how many people will want to fly between specific places at specific times.
Gotcha.
And interestingly, their AI doesn't just predict demand, it also looks at the likelihood of competitors changing their prices. So they can adjust their own fares in response.
That's so smart.
And then they also use AI to analyze seasonal travel trends, so they can optimize their schedules for peak periods.
So that's why we see those crazy price fluctuations, especially during holidays and stuff.
Exactly. A lot of that is driven by AI.
Fascinating.
Oh.
What about easyJet? How do they use these advanced systems?
So easyJet also relies on machine learning algorithms.
Okay.
Now, while both AI and machine learning fall under the same umbrella, easyJet's focus seems to be more on identifying complex patterns in their existing data.
Like what?
So things like booking trends, but also real-time information like weather and even airport capacity.
Huh?
And this lets them make very precise adjustments to their flight schedules and improve connections for their passengers.
So Ryanair is maybe more focused on anticipating demand and tweaking prices.
Yeah.
Whereas easyJet is also using this tech to make the whole experience smoother for the passenger.
You got it.
That's really interesting.
And both airlines use something called Geographic Information Systems, or GIS.
Okay.
Now, you might think of this as just advanced mapping, but it's actually much more powerful than that. Well, they use GIS to visualize market opportunities, see where their competitors are operating, and find those underserved routes we talked about earlier.
Right.
They can combine tons of different data like regional economic growth projections, tourism statistics, population density to get this incredibly clear and complete picture.
Why?
So they can even layer demographic data with flight path info to find areas where there's lots of potential customers, but no direct flights.
It's like they're building this super detailed digital map of air travel supply and demand.
Oh, precisely.
That's wild.
And the report specifically mentions how easyJet uses big data to get a deeper understanding of their customers.
Okay.
This lets them personalize their services and identify growth areas where there's a lot of demand.
Makes sense.
And as for Ryanair, well, they're using predictive modeling not just for revenue, but for efficiency as well.
Like how?
So things like optimizing crew schedules and even figuring out the exact amount of fuel they need for each flight,
Wow.
which saves them money and helps the environment too.
The level of detail is pretty amazing.
It is.
Oh, and there was that fast fact from IATA mentioned in the report.
Oh, right.
What was that again?
Yeah, so IATA found that low-cost carriers that use big data analytics for route optimization saw a 12% increase in their RASXM.
Yes.
Yeah, revenue per available seat mile.
Oh, right.
Basically how much money they're making for every seat on every mile they fly.
Okay.
So 12% is a huge improvement.
It is.
Shows how valuable this tech can be.
Totally. That's a really clear way to see how this approach is actually affecting their bottom line.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about the data and the tech,
Mm-hmm.
but how much does what we as passengers do, like our actual behavior, actually impact these network expansion decisions?
It's absolutely central.
Really?
Yeah. For Ryanair, the report highlights how closely they track booking trends.
So where people are actually booking too.
Exactly.
Oh.
And they also look at seasonal demand, and they actively seek out and analyze customer feedback. So their whole approach is geared towards leisure and budget travelers.
Which is why they're so quick to add flights to, popular vacation spots during peak season.
Exactly. If there's a surge in bookings to a certain Greek island, for example, Ryanair will likely notice and adjust their schedule accordingly.
Wow.
And they can do that really quickly.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
What about easyJet? How do they factor in customer behavior?
Well, because easyJet operates from major airports, they also consider things like passenger preferences for short-haul travel,
Okay.
and importantly, good connections between major cities.
Right.
This means they can create routes that appeal to a broader mix of travelers.
So not just people going on vacation.
Right. Business travelers, too.
Makes sense. So essentially, Ryanair is reacting to specific trends and focusing on price-sensitive travelers, while easyJet is trying to cater to a wider range of needs with those reliable connections.
That's a great way to put it. And this difference in approach actually reflects some fundamental strategic differences between the two airlines.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. What are the core principles that guide Ryanair and easyJet when they're deciding where to fly next?
Well, the research lays out two very distinct philosophies.
All right.
Ryanair has what you might call an aggressive approach. They focus on operating from those low-cost secondary airports, and they run a lot of flights to dominate underserved markets.
Right.
Their main selling point is affordability, and using these smaller airports helps them keep costs down so they can offer those low fares.
Makes sense.
So for them, it's all about volume and low prices.
So a real focus on cost leadership and dominating specific parts of the market.
Exactly. easyJet, on the other hand, tends to prioritize different things.
Okay.
They focus more on quality and convenience.
Like we talked about earlier with the major airports.
Right. They want to attract passengers who are looking for a balance between price and convenience.
Okay.
And because they use major airports, they can also tap into the connecting traffic from long-haul flights.
Something Ryanair doesn't really do. Interesting. So Ryanair might be sacrificing some convenience to keep costs down, while easyJet is willing to pay a bit more for those prime locations.
That's a good way to see it. And the report emphasizes that these different strategies are intentional.
Okay.
They're designed to allow both airlines to cater to different types of passengers.
It's like they're not always competing for the same customers.
Oh, exactly. You wouldn't expect a business traveler who needs to fly out of a major city at a specific time to choose a Ryanair flight from a smaller airport further away.
Totally. So Even with all this planning and analysis, I imagine there are still challenges that these airlines face.
Oh, of course. It's not always smooth sailing.
What are some of those, like, turbulence points when it comes to planning their routes?
Well, the report highlights a few key challenges that both airlines have to deal with.
Okay.
One is fluctuating passenger demand.
Right.
Travel patterns can change quickly for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And then there are the regulatory constraints, which can affect where they can fly and how much it costs.
Makes sense.
And of course, the airline industry is very competitive.
Always.
So they're constantly trying to win over passengers.
Okay, so those are some general challenges.
Mhm.
Are there any specific challenges that one airline might face more than the other?
Yeah, so the report mentions that Ryanair often has difficulty negotiating with airport authorities,
Okay.
especially at those more desirable primary airports.
Like getting good deals on landing fees and stuff.
Exactly. And this
Yeah.
can sometimes limit their expansion into those key hub locations.
Right.
easyJet, on the other hand, has the challenge of higher operating costs because of those major airports.
Right. Makes sense.
So they need to make sure their planes are really full to be profitable.
Higher risk, higher reward, maybe.
You could say that.
Interesting.
And the report also reminds us that both airlines have to adapt to external factors,
Like what?
like geopolitical events, which can make certain routes uneconomical, or growing concerns about the environment, which can influence passenger choices.
Yeah, the world can throw some pretty big curveballs sometimes.
Yeah, it definitely can.
Okay, so in this really dynamic, competitive environment, how do Ryanair and easyJet stay ahead of the game?
Well, the report stresses that both airlines prioritize innovation and staying close to their customers.
So,
For Ryanair, this means constantly improving their digital platform.
like their website and app.
Exactly. They're always working on making it easier for customers to find and book flights, offering things like better fare comparison tools and personalized recommendations.
So making it as easy as possible to find those cheap fares and, maybe tempting you with a few extras along the way.
Precisely. And easyJet, according to the research, is focusing more on sustainability.
Okay.
So investing in more fuel-efficient planes and offering carbon offsetting programs,
Right.
which is not only good for the environment, but also appeals to a growing number of passengers who are concerned about their environmental impact.
Absolutely.
So by highlighting their sustainability efforts, they're tapping into those values.
Makes sense.
And ultimately, the report concludes that both airlines rely on transparent pricing and operational reliability.
I mean,
No hidden fees, clear breakdowns of costs, and getting passengers to their destinations on time.
right, because a delayed or canceled flight can really ruin the whole experience, even if the ticket was cheap.
Absolutely.
So, to sum up, we've really gone deep into how low-cost carriers like Ryanair and easyJet plan their routes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a surprisingly complex process that involves a ton of data, sophisticated technology like AI and GIS, and a deep understanding of how passengers behave.
Yeah.
We've seen how Ryanair focuses on low cost and high frequency from those secondary airports, while easyJet prioritizes convenience and connectivity from those major hubs.
Right.
And we've also looked at the challenges they face and how they try to stay competitive through innovation and a focus on their customers.
That's a great overview.
It's really interesting to see how a decision that seems pretty simple, an airline adding a new route, is actually the result of this incredible amount of analysis and planning.
It really is.
And when you think about all the data involved, from big economic trends to individual booking patterns, it makes you wonder what other industries could be transformed by applying this kind of analysis. It's really something to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.